So we'll start with just some quick intros. So I'm Matthew Schutte from Holochain, and you are?
Brian Robertson from Holacracy One, founder of Holacracy.
And what is Holacracy?
It's a new way to run an organization. It's a framework for self-management. The self-management movement is kind of fairly large over just the past couple of years. And Holacracy is really the only packaged system or framework that companies that want to get from the conventional management hierarchy to a more nimble self-managed structure can kind of take Holacracy, install it, and have a framework to build on top of.
And there are some organizations that have been using this already, not just for the last year or two, right? You've been around for a little while.
Yeah, about 10 years, and there's about 1,000 companies now all over the world using Holacracy, including ones you may have heard of, David Allen Company, Zappos, 2 government agencies, one in Dubai, one in Washington State, and departments in many bigger companies doing it at a department level. So yeah, it's spread quite a bit all over the world.
Amazing. And what's different? Like, how is this not just normal company stuff? What is it that you guys do?
Yeah, so once Holacracy is fully installed, there's no need for the management hierarchy that we're used to. So it's really removing the main function that we use to get order in a company, the management hierarchy. But it's not just throwing it out. That would, I think, be rather foolish. It's replacing it with a new way of achieving structure and order, but one that's much more dynamic and allows for more complexity to be managed more easily. So, when I say no managers, which is what Holacracy does, people tend to get 2 common misconceptions. One of them is that means there's no structure, and actually the opposite is true. Holacracy brings more structure, not less, than a management hierarchy. It just gets there differently, and it gives everyone a voice in kind of dynamically learning what the structure needs to be and updating the structure. So it's not a static structure; it's a very living, dynamic structure. And the other common misconception is that must mean, all decisions are made by consensus or some kind of group process or meetings or something. And that's also not true. Holacracy is more autocratic than a management hierarchy. The difference is it's much more of a distributed autocracy. So everyone in the organization has some piece they lead, and they don't have a boss to, countermand them or micromanage them. They know that this piece is theirs to lead, this role, and you might fill many roles in many parts of the organization. They're yours to lead, and your colleagues have their roles and they're leading their roles. And then there's clear responsibilities between them. There's clear boundaries between them. So I find metaphors make it easier to understand. This is much more like what you see in a city where, there is a framework. It's not total anarchy. There's a framework of, laws and rule of law, property rights, regulations, whatever. There's a framework for defining how we get to work together. But within that framework, we have a ton of freedom to self-organize. And, I know what's mine to control and what I shouldn't control because it's my neighbors. I know where the boundaries are. I know my responsibilities to the larger system. And a metaphor I like even better, the human body, right? We're sitting here, trillions of cells, all aligned without a CEO cell telling us what to do, right? Like, it's a pretty cool system, and I think this actually ties into some of what you do as well. There's when you look at that type of structure, it's called a holarchy. You end up, this is nature's way of scaling to deal with complexity, right? You've got every unit, every cell in your body has autonomy and self-organization, right? There's no external party that's kind of pushing in and organizing it. It's its own internal encapsulated self-organized entity, which is also a part of a larger whole autonomous entity, so say an organ, right? And that organ, it doesn't boss the cells around, it doesn't micromanage them, it's not a top-down command hierarchy like we're used to in a company. Rather, it takes the autonomy of each cell and it ropes it together into a larger autonomy, a larger whole system. And that's why I can go for a jog and every cell in my body is aligned. My heart beats faster, my blood pumps, my lungs expand, my muscles contract, right? I've got this alignment of a whole system without a top-down control paradigm to get there, but rather a distributed control paradigm that leaves autonomy at every layer of the system and yet kind of encapsulates them into these larger and larger units or functions. And that's exactly the paradigm that Holacracy brings into an organization. So it still lets it function as an integrated overall whole system, but it doesn't get the order from a top-down command hierarchy. It gets it from breaking down clarity of, which parts control what and what are the responsibilities to the larger whole, and giving them a process. Holacracy adds processes at every level so that everyone can get involved in defining the structure at that level and evolving it as we learn together what makes more sense to organize around our purpose.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, we sell the, it's almost like you've spoken about this once before.
I have.
we use that same, I may have even spoke those same sentences. There's no CEO sell. I know I probably said that yesterday on 2 of my Facebook Live, recorded calls. And we think about that as that pattern that natural systems use, like you said, as being amazing at handling complexity and at adapting. And it feels to me like those top-down hierarchies, they are designed to be really efficient, but really efficient at what was useful last year. They have massive learning disabilities as an organism. And it's not that the people are bad, it's that the structure is bad, right? That process is not a great way of sensing what is needed on an ongoing basis and being able to adapt to that. My perspective, and from what I've heard and seen with Holacracy in the past, is you don't just drop this thing in and all of a sudden we're good. The organism, the social organism, this company, this community changes shape of who's holding responsibility and how they're exercising that over time through the lived experience. Is that right?
Oh yeah, it's, day one of adopting Holacracy is not the end of the journey. It's the start of a very difficult transformation, actually. It's about a 5-year journey, just because of the social change required. It's changing people's habits of how they relate to power, right? We're changing the way power works from a top-down command hierarchy to something different. It's a constitutional-driven system. There's a Holacracy constitution that spells out the basic rules of the game, and the Constitution holds power, and it gives power to a governance process that happens in every team, and that process gives power to every individual's roles, right? So people are shifting from looking to the bosses up a hierarchy for power, or looking to the group. Group consensus is one of the main ways we get power in management hierarchies. Ironically, top-down hierarchy, but we spend a lot of time in meetings, socializing things, trying to get everyone bought in, which is a huge time suck. Because that gives us a sense of legitimacy that we can actually go, drive this change we're trying to do. And yet that also kills so many innovations and potential changes because you can't get the consensus you need or the management hierarchy approval. And Holacracy is shifting that. So it's hugely difficult, right? We have habits of how we show up and influence and lead. And this is requiring us to kind of learn a new way, in the same way that, someone who's used to operating somewhere in a feudal hierarchy, who's suddenly thrust into a modern free market, society is going to have an adjustment, right? Like there's, especially if you've learned to master playing the politics of the feudal system, right? Like if you've learned to get things done in that structure, and now you're suddenly thrust into being an entrepreneur and trying to, create value in a modern society. That's a shift,
You are maladapted.
Yeah.
To the context.
And it's not, I love your point. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with the management hierarchy. I'm actually a huge fan. Management hierarchy has been a wonderful tool for humanity to organize its work endeavors. It's gotten us to the point in time we are at today. We're not sitting here talking about alternatives because it's failed us for centuries. We're sitting here talking about alternatives because it's been so wildly successful that it's created a world more complex than it can manage.
100%.
Right?
100%.
Yeah. It's that complexity that when that increases, the command hierarchy we're used to starts failing, right? When complexity reaches beyond a certain point, which is why we don't see nature organizing as much in command hierarchies in our biological world. It just doesn't deal with complexity.
That's right. That's right. Well, I know that you're...
Yeah, I'm curious. Like, connect this to me. Connect this to me for your stuff.
Well, can you tell me, because you know a little, we've had a conversation before. Talk to me about what it is that drew you towards us. I know you've been involved in the cryptocurrency world for a little while and distributed computing, and obviously you're interested in future of organizations. What about this project has been interesting to you?
Yeah, so I have been in the crypto world for a while. I was a early investor in Ethereum, and I mean, when I first read and heard the vision for Ethereum at the very beginning, it really grabbed me. Like, wow! I don't think I need to go into the reasons for that. I think your listeners are probably going to be tuned into that already. really, really interesting. What grabbed me about Holochain, though, is what you're bringing in is this holarchic structure, right, for dealing with complexity. And that's, I think, one of the challenges. I mean, scaling is, top of mind of many, many, many different crypto projects right now. And, in my work, I've seen the power of holarchy as a structure to enable scaling. If you can encapsulate complexity and present it to the outside world as, oh, this is just one little single entity, even as, when you break down and you look inside that entity, it itself is an entire self-organizing distributed network, right? But when you get flat networks have scalability issues almost by definition, right? This is why in my work with organizations, when I see a lot of companies that recognize the limits of management hierarchy and want something next, often they try to throw it out for some kind of flat structure or networked environment. And more often than not, I don't see that working well, at least if they're at a certain scale, right? That's fine in a 15-person company. That can be okay. It's still painful, actually, even at that size. But it doesn't scale well. And when I look at what I see in a lot of the cryptocurrencies out there, and I'm still a big fan of many of them, but there's so many that are looking at these just complete flat network structures where you've got, a network, and networks are powerful. But when it comes to, trying to scale complexity, when you need to act as more like a single entity at times, which, you do when you get to distributed computing, when you're executing, software effectively. Look at any modern software development, how it runs on a single computer, and we've long since learned, my background's in software development, to use holarchic structures. The basics of object-oriented programming, which has been around for decades, right, is a holarchic structure: encapsulate objects within objects, expose them to the outside world as a single entity, but inside, it's really a network of entities that is quite a bit of complexity that's encapsulated in one whole. Right. So when I look at that in the crypto world, and I first found you guys, I mean, it was, oh, that's interesting. You're obviously, the name itself, implies something there, right? Especially when you kind of dig in and realize that, oh yeah, you guys do get the value of a holarchic structure, and you're building a cryptocurrency, and not just a cryptocurrency, but really a protocol, right, around that, how do you encapsulate complexity and present simplicity. Maybe you can tell me more. Did I get that right? I mean, I'm not an expert. I've dug in a little bit here, but
there's so much more. But no, I think you got that totally right. From my perspective, the networks are amazing, and networks enable communication. Right? If we have a centralized network, Ma Bell and the telephone system, with everything going through one node initially, right, it was better than nothing. And then a decentralized network, wow, that becomes more resilient. A distributed network, wow, that's even better. But there's a huge qualitative shift when you go from a network to an ecosystem. And that shift is that in an ecosystem, in a network, you have the different actors, the different agents speaking the same protocol or the same shared set of protocols. But in an ecosystem, you have agents who will speak one protocol or one grammar over here and be able to send and receive signals with this network over here, and then can transform those signals and propagate them out in a different protocol. I can see something using light as a protocol and then speak it. Oh, there's a window over there, right? I can translate that. I've taken that signal and I've transformed it into a different protocol, and suddenly others who didn't have that sensing capacity initially suddenly become capable of doing so. And from our perspective, that pattern is just fundamental to being able to adapt and delegate, right? For being able to hand off some of your sense making, some of how you're literally steering in the world to others. We do it as humans socially, right? I don't know how to do everything in my life. I bring my car to my mechanic. I delegate, that what I heard a noise, my car's making a noise. I don't then go to mechanic school to figure out how to diagnose that. I find the party to hand that off to. Biological systems work that way as well. But the way in which we're currently doing computer networks and large scale organizations doesn't work that way. And so our it's kind of like you. Our ambition with this project wasn't to change the internet. Our ambition with this project was to change how humans can coordinate, because we, like you, believe that humans really need to up our game in terms of our social organization models, and if we're going to have any shot at managing the complexity that we're facing. And we don't think there's just one answer. We think there's all sorts, just like you find when there's not one pattern that you drop in. Yes, you're giving sort of a template that can help people evolve and find the pattern and the shape and the processes that actually suit their context. But you've designed your structure for evolution in a way that I think very closely mirrors how we're trying to design these communication systems to support evolving social organizational processes.
Yeah, and actually, tell me more about, so consensus is an interesting thing here. Ironically, as much as I'm a fan in the crypto space in general, consensus is kind of like a dirty word in my work, right? Like in organizations, consensus gets in the way. It kills things again and again and again. It does not scale. It's slow. It's painful. So one of the key things in my work has been, how do you construct organizational forms that don't just centralize control in one person, because we all know the limits of that, but that also don't rely on consensus, right? At least not at a complete scale. If you need consensus across your entire organization, something's wrong, right? Holacracy has its way of dealing with that, with more of a distributed autocracy and a governance process that's localized in lots of different places, but still not based on consensus. And it's a different solution than what you guys have done. But I noticed another principle that I really resonated with when I was doing my research on the Holo. You also aren't doing consensus in the same way that you see it in most crypto projects. And in fact, in some ways, with your protocol done well, it's dealing with the question of, well, what happens if you don't have consensus? And tell me more about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is probably the biggest thing that for people in the crypto community, they go, huh? How does that work? It can't possibly work. And it's, it has to do with Bitcoin proposed a specific solution to a specific problem, right? Satoshi Nakamoto, the Bitcoin white paper, there was a specific solution, proof of work, Nakamoto consensus. Every full node is going to hold on to a copy of everything that everybody else does, and we'll have some lottery process for deciding who gets to add the next sort of block of history, basically every 10 minutes or so. Like you said, that doesn't work. I mean, not that it doesn't work at all, but if you want to run a community, that is not a viable process. It's really slow. It's really expensive. It does not scale well. So we actually just copy the pattern that biological systems make use of instead, which is we use an immune system response. So we do have people there in our system, in Holochain, if you're running an application, there is consensus at one level. The consensus is, what's the game that we're playing? So there's consensus about the rules, the processes, right? And so if people are running a particular Holochain application together, they all are agreeing about the rules that they're supposed to be playing by. When someone takes an action, that action if this is Twitter and I'm tweeting, I send a message out to the network. Now, in this Twitter app, this is original gangsta OG Twitter, right? It's text only, 140 characters. If I send that thing out and I wrote a 1,000-character tweet, I'd hacked my node some way that let me send a novel as a tweet. When that lands with somebody else on the network, the first thing they do is they check their copy of the rules to see if this message plays in accordance with the rules of the game that we're playing together. And if it doesn't, they go, no, rejected. Right? And when we share content in a Holochain application, it gets distributed randomly to a set number of other members of the community. So if we were doing Twitter and we had 1 billion users, we don't need 1 billion users holding on to my tweet. We need 200 users. And if some of them drop off, the other ones who are still online will go, hey, we lost some guys, and they'll recruit new people to make backup copies. So we maintain 200 copies on the network at all times. That's good enough. right? That's the way that BitTorrent actually manages itself. And so what we've done really is take some of the tools that BitTorrent made use of, and some of the tools that blockchain makes use of, and some of the tools that Git, the most common software for collaborative software development, basically, makes use of. And we combined those in this way that makes it so that if somebody cheats, it's not that they couldn't cheat. Similar to blockchain, you can try to cheat, but if somebody cheats, as soon as any other party sees that, they reject it. And if they don't reject it, they risk others rejecting them. They risk showing up as a bad actor who's going to basically get removed from the system. Others are going to start treating them like they're not a member of the community. You may say you're playing the same game as us, but you keep sending these things that aren't how we're supposed to be playing together. You keep writing these novels when we're doing Twitter. I'm going to stop sending messages to you. I'm going to stop being willing to receive messages from you, and I'm going to let everybody else know to do the same. And when I let them know to do the same, I just send them the evidence. Because in a Holochain application, in order to take some action, in order to write a tweet or validate some content, you have to sign it. You have to put your name on it. Now, that's not your real world name. It's your identity in that application. But that makes it so that if somebody starts misbehaving, it's very easy for the rest of the community to have an immune system response. And each of those, just like in the body, it's not that there's one order that comes from above. Each cell goes, whoa, something's going on here. They start taking action themselves, but they also send out a call to their friends, to everybody else around them, to similarly, hey, take a look at this. There's an issue over here, to start addressing it. Our take on this is that enables you to design the rules that are appropriate for your application. People often go, well, how does this, isn't blockchain security better? There's no one-size-fits-all security. Security means you're defending against particular failures, and different use cases are going to have different forms of failure. Whether the money goes to the wrong party, well, if the money goes to the wrong party, that's a particular form of failure. Did somebody find out that it was me who sent the money? Well, that might be another form of failure. Did the message not get there at all? That's a form of failure. Did it take too long? That's a form of, and each of these is different. And in a Holochain application, like in a holocratic organization, the community is able to pick the sets of rules, the things that they're going to sort of check for, so that they can optimize speed, scale, cost, and defend against this particular kinds of risks that they face in their context. We don't think there is a one-size-fits-all security solution for the world. That's ridiculous. We think that good enough for cheap enough kicks the crap out of perfect but limitlessly expensive any day of the week.
Well, this is really pointing to another thing that kind of got me curious about you guys initially as I dug in more and interested. It sounds like what you're describing then is what I call a meta framework, right? Which is what Holacracy is as well. When an organization adopts Holacracy, it's not telling them, here's the specific way you should structure your business, right? Here's how you should do your marketing, or even fundamentals, like here's how you should pay people, compensation or budget, or hire or fire, right? Holacracy does not tell you any of those things. What it does is give you a meta framework for figuring out your own governance rules in your own unique organization, and then adapting them over time. So it's kind of, allows it to evolve to be fit for that specific environment. Right? Because each organization has a naturally different set of principles or criteria that it's going to design those systems around. So what Holacracy can do and still be portable to lots of different companies of all different shapes and sizes is not try to give you the concrete answers to that, but give you the framework, the meta framework that says, all right, here's how you decide those things, and here's how you change those things, and here's how you interoperate and communicate across different parts of your organization. So as you said, the rules for communication at that level, but not the content rules, not the rules for how you deal with the specific things that happen in your organizational application, if you will, right? I'm fascinated by meta frameworks like that, right? Like, and I mean, that's a loose definition. You can say Ethereum to some degree is also a meta framework in that it lets you create any application within it. But there's different kind of levels and layers of meta framework. And it sounds like what you guys are trying to build is kind of a higher level meta framework that allows a lot more creativity or flexibility in each use case within that, trying to find its own unique rules and its own unique, principles, if you will, of how to order itself. And how to deal with the conflicts, how to deal with it's not trying to prevent conflict, it's trying to give you a system that can adapt in the face of conflict.
Yeah.
right? Which is exactly what Holacracy is doing. It's not trying to prevent tension, as we say in an organization. It's trying to give you a meta framework so you can harness it and then figure out what do we do in the face of different parts of the organization that are naturally in conflict with each other, because that's going to happen in a complex adaptive system, right? And then how do you integrate it? And
Yeah.
it sounds like that's exactly what you guys are building, a meta framework that allows conflict, which is why there's consensus works differently and you don't need it in kind of one dimension across the whole system. You know, you've got rather a meta framework that allows conflict to exist and then get integrated and resolved.
That's right.
Is that a fair?
Absolutely. The system is designed to focus on exactly that. Basically, how do you decide what counts as conflict, right?
Yeah.
And how do you do and then it's up to the users themselves to figure out what conflict resolution looks like. Not by users, I mean application developers. I think that what you said about Ethereum is really on point. It's kind of a meta application framework or meta framework, but it's also a platform, right? They were trying to design a decentralized network. So a network where people were able to do computation, generalized computation, without there being one party in the middle that you had to trust, right?
Yeah.
And that's cool, but we were trying to go beyond a network to create an ecosystem. So there's not one big holochain. Every application is its own separate space with its own members, its own set of rules, its own shared storage. If you and 20 of your friends build some holochain application, our organization might never even know about it.
Yeah, right.
So this is a pattern, like DNA is a pattern.
Yeah.
The way that Ethereum does this, the DNA has to check in with every other bit of DNA. You know, like all the parts of the jellyfish would also have to talk to all the parts of the eagle and the elephant. That's crazy, right? That's not the pattern nature runs. It enables these different these biological organisms to take very, very different forms. That's why we're giving Holochain away to the world for free. Holochain itself doesn't have a built-in business model. It's a pattern. We see it as a new medium of communication that can enable social organisms, these distributed applications, to create grammars that work for themselves, for them to pay attention to the signals, the risks, the things that are relevant to them in their context, and then enable the individuals that are running these things and participating in them to bridge between them. And that enables an ecosystem, not just a network.
I found that a really interesting distinction. And, you know, for you guys, there's not even a cryptocurrency, a coin or anything associated with that. It is literally, you mean it that way, it is just a pattern. There's software to enact that pattern or whatever, but it's kind of like for us, Holacracy is just it's an open source system. It's a document, really. It's a documented protocol or system or framework, whatever. And it's free. It's out there. Anyone can just go grab it and use that rule set. But you know, then within that, you have specific organizations that are built specific ways. What you do have a cryptocurrency that you're doing an ICO, I know, but that's not for the general concept of Holochain that we've been talking about. It's for one specific application and one specific, you know, instantiation of this general pattern, you know, for one specific purpose, right? And there might be others that follow it.
That's right. Yeah. And so Holo Host is the big flagship application that we're putting out to the world. And if a Holochain application has a bunch of individuals who are each choosing to speak this grammar, right, to run this app, peer-to-peer Twitter, Uber, Airbnb, whatever it is that they're doing, they're each choosing to internalize, to run on their own device, this grammar, this application, and they can talk to one another. But they need to do that, right? In a Holochain app, you have to show up as a peer. It's really lightweight. If you had 1 billion people running peer-to-peer Twitter over the course of a year, you would end up having probably about as much storage on your device as 2 photographs. Right? I mean, that's crazy, right?
Cool.
So it's lightweight enough that, yeah, I will bear that burden in order to have that new capacity. This is how humans work as well. Yes, I will learn that language in order to be able to speak that language, right?
Yep.
But the limitation of that is that you have to be a peer in order to participate there. And so what we're doing with Holo Host is we're trying to make it easy for these new peer-to-peer applications to have visitors from the outside world, right? And the way that works is some of the members of your community raise their hand and go, hey, you can use some of the spare storage and processing power on my laptop or my desktop to serve out websites to visitors from the centralized web.
Yeah.
Why would you want to have visitors from the centralized web? Well, if we're doing a peer-to-peer Airbnb, we don't want just early geeky Holochain adopters,
Yeah.
to be the only people who can book rooms. We want anybody to be able to book a room, but we want this service to work the way we want it to work, and we want it to be able to evolve. We want the advantages of these sorts of holographic or holocratic structures.
I love that aspect of what you're doing. The bridge there, the fact that you can build an application in your framework here and serve it out to the normal web in a way that no one needs to even download a special web browser. It's literally identical to the end user as going to Airbnb or Twitter or whatever. Just a different URL. And what they're really accessing though is this decentralized computing platform. That's pretty cool.
That's right. I mean, my grandfather, I love him to death. I've been trying to explain what I've been up to with this stuff for 10 years, right? It's not happening. But he'll be able to open a web browser and type in a URL just like he has been for decades now, and book a room. And from our perspective, that's really critical because it's going to accelerate the adoption of these new patterns. And it also incentivizes people to come play and contribute their storage capacity as well. People go, well, this is just web hosting. I mean, how big of a thing can that be? Is that really something that I should invest in? That seems like such a small thing. Look, Amazon is one of the largest companies on the planet. Their CEO is the wealthiest man on the planet. Amazon Web Services is their web hosting business. It makes up 10% of their revenues, but more profit than the entire rest of the organization combined, right? So web hosting is the cash cow of Amazon. You can think about what we're trying to do with Holo Host as basically doing to the Amazon's cash cow what Uber did to taxis, right? We're trying to take these idle assets, these laptops and desktops that everybody has all over the planet that are being put to no use right now. There's tons of capacity on these machines, and nobody's getting to benefit from them in the way that we're benefiting from the spare bedroom in our house. Holo Host is trying to change that. And it's not just hey, you'll make a buck. It's you'll make a buck and you'll help us shift from this world of surveillance, web servers and corporations and an internet that doesn't work for you, it works for business, to a web that works for us as individuals and helps us as individuals form really thriving communities. And so that's the play.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm excited. I know we're about at the end of our time. I can't think of a better note to end on.
Oh, I should say the one more note.
Yeah, please, go for it.
What's the business model, right? Because this is a business. The ICO, we're doing an ICO right now. The ICO is not our business model. We have a business model. We charge 1% on the transaction fees when people get paid for doing this web hosting. When the developer pays them for that web hosting, we take a tiny slice. It's far less than pretty much any other platform or payment processor takes, but we've designed a far more efficient protocol than any of those other things as well. So we think that will be enough, not only for us to grow Holo Host, but 50% of those revenues are going to go back to supporting Holochain. And
and this broader new protocol, really new pattern, as you said, right? I love that. That could be used for so much more than just Holo Host. That's really just one specific first, instance.
It's just the first stepping stone. Yeah. It's a big stepping stone.
Yeah, it is. It's an on-ramp, but it's, that's great. Well, I'm excited. I'm going to be following you guys. Really exciting. I see so many principles in common with what I'm doing, with what you're building, and that has me really interested. So, let's keep the dialogue going over time.
Brian, I've been following your work for years. This is a huge honor. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Have a good one.